Hello, animators and artists, and welcome to the Animation Trends event. Mark Simon, the godfather of storyboarding, is an Atlanta-based artist. His career includes being a story artist, producer, and director for both live action and animated projects, with over 6,000 production credits, as well as authoring 13 popular industry texts and writing major trade publications. We invited Mark onto today's ATE session to discuss his work storyboarding for live action on Stranger Things. So, Mark, welcome to the session.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Always great to see you. This should be a lot of fun.
Amazing. So, our audience tends to be more familiar with storyboarding for animation than live action. So,
hmm
in a nutshell, how are storyboards used in a live action production, and how much do you need to storyboard on a given episode?
Well, in both in features and TV series for live action, generally we just storyboard stunts, visual effects, and or special camera moves. Like if there's a really big oneer or very particular transitions that they want to match camera moves, things like that really need to be pre-planned, and other crews need to get involved, things like that. That's where we get in and start storyboarding. And then if within a sequence, we'll storyboard all the shots that connect them. So if there's a big stunt, the shots, the whole sequence around that generally will storyboard, but almost never the entire movie or entire episode. First of all, for TV, there's not time. Generally, we'll only have 4 to 6 days, maybe a little bit more on some of the bigger shows, but that's about it to storyboard everything that's needed for an episode.
All right. And for our audience who's watching this at home, you are able to ask questions. This is a live panel discussion or a live session. So if you have questions about the process of storyboarding and not about upcoming episodes of Stranger Things, Mark will not answer those. Feel free to type your questions in the chat and they might come out of my mouth. So, Mark, how did you get involved on Stranger Things, and what was your process in production?
That's a really good question about how I got involved, and I really wish I could tell you. Um, I'm pretty sure it was because I worked with one of the production managers on another show or movie, and they just called me. I just got a phone call and then I started. It was a pretty simple process on my end, um, but I don't even remember who called me. And it's not that I'm forgetful. It's just I do a lot of productions, and generally it's a lot at the same time. I've got a lot of overlapping shows, and this was a few years ago. On season 4, I'd mentioned to you before we got started, we were halfway through the season when COVID hit in season 4, and literally in the middle of the storyboards I'm going to be showing you guys, we got shut down literally overnight. I was getting notes from the director on Friday, and Sunday night I got a call where the production shut down for the foreseeable future. So I didn't even get a chance to finish everything that I had roughed out on it, which was a shame because it was so much fun. Um, but yeah, it was just almost every day I get calls on projects, and if I have time, I take it and move on. So, um, but I can go in depth here on showing you the process. So
All right, let's
on
take a
this,
look.
grab my pen. So when I got the call, there had already been other story artists working. Stranger Things does work a little differently than most shows that I work on. Generally, on this show, there is a full-time story artist working in the effects department. They're working on things before the directors come on, and this director, before he started actual prep on the show, he had worked with an artist that he had known previously, and then when he came to start his paid prep, the actual prep time for the episode, production said, we want you to work with Mark. So they had called me, whoever it was, as I mentioned, who called me. And so I came in and started working with the director. So when I got the call to do it, it was for episodes 5 and 6 of season 4. And the way this show works, there was each director does 2 episodes. It was a block of 2, Generally on 1 hour shows, a director does one at a time. So they're prepping one while someone else is shooting. And when that director goes into post, the one that was prepping goes into production, and a new director comes in to start prepping. So in this one, there were large blocks of 2 episodes. I'm saying large blocks because it was a lot. The shooting schedule is very long on this show. It's wonderful to be able to do. It's why it looks so good. So before I met with the director, they sent me the scripts for episodes 4 and 5. So the first thing I do is I read through the scripts a few times to get a feel for what it is that I'm going to be working on. And quite often at that point, I still don't even know which sequences I'm going to be doing. Then once I find out who the director is, in this case, it was Nimrod Antal was directing these 2 episodes. So I went on IMDb and found some of the recent things he'd been working on, and I researched the directors. And I look at things that has like, how do they like stationary cameras, or is it floating camera? Do they like to center balance things, or do they like to have characters off on thirds? How do they frame it on close-ups? Are they cropping the head, or is there headroom? Over the shoulder shots, is everything really tight? Is it dirty overs, or is it fully clean overs? Things like that. I research as much as I can visually, so that when I start sketching with the director, because I always sketch live with the directors, I'm instantly sketching in their visual storytelling style. So I do a lot of that kind of research. And then I generally, after I see what the directors, how they work, I'll read the script again. I'll end up reading the script quite a few times so that I know what's happening. Like, for instance, every once in a while on a show, production will only give me sides, which means only the sequences that I'm going to be storyboarding. And I always tell them, no, you have to give me the full script. And they say, well, we're protecting. I went, it doesn't matter if what you're trying to protect as a story artist. If I don't know the entire story, I can't help you. And that had happened on one episode where a character had been shot early in the script, but the sides they gave me, I had no idea. So once I got the whole script, it's like, well, that kind of changes. The character can't even grab their gun because they were shot in their shooting arm. So, things like that makes a huge difference. So you story artists, never allow production not to give you the entire script. And when I say it that way, I mean it. I'll get after them, say, no, you have to give it to me. And they always do. So you can insist on things whether or not they originally want to or not. So then I generally try to get whatever reference images I can. And a lot of times we're working remotely. So in every production is different. I'll either ask for images to be sent to me in plans. Sometimes, like on Stranger Things, I was there on set. So I was able to walk between the sound stages and like here, this is the set for the Russian prison. So I was actually able to walk around and take some reference photos. Other times, some productions have a really good online database of locations and cast and wardrobe, stuff like that. I'll get online, I'll download the elements that I'll need. And then there are times I'll walk with the director. Like once, as Nimrod and I were about to get started, he and I walked through this set. And he would actually, for instance, he pointed out, all right, I'm going to want this angle right here. I like the depth. So, at one point, we're going to have the camera here. So I'll take a reference photo and I'll use that. So again, I'm doing everything I can to try to get the director's vision as accurate as possible. On this, the art department, and more art departments are doing this, had built CG sets. And more often than not, it's in SketchUp. And then I would export out of SketchUp Pro an FDX file. And then because that version you can import into Storyboard Pro. So I was able to grab whatever angles I needed that way. And then, somewhere on location, like we had this plane that was on one of the backlot locations that we had a big action sequence that we were in. So then the producers and the director and I and probably and the stunt coordinator, we went in the plane and we're figuring out what we could do because there are a lot of logistics on where's the camera going to go, and where are they entering from, and where the prop's going to be hidden, because there was a gun that was going to slide around and cans that would roll, things like that. So we would actually walk through it together, which is really helpful. And then before I start drawing, I'll go through and I'll find whatever references on what the characters are wearing and what the characters look like, what their current hairstyles are like, all those types of things. Because the more accurate I am to what it's actually going to look like, the better. It also helps everyone know who is who. And I personally like drawing my characters to look like the actors. And I'll build a library of reference materials. And I literally build the library in Storyboard Pro, so I can just drag whatever elements I need in to be able to draw from. I love the library in this software. It's fantastic. And then I'll sit down, I'll start working with the director. Now, this is not Nimrod. I don't have a picture of he and I working together. This is another director, Alex Zam, and I've done 6 different movies with Alex. But whenever I can be on location, the director and I will sit side by side, and I always have my little characters, my action figures that I'll pose. Since we can't hold up actors in front of us, I'll use those to help figure out with the director what it is actually they want to see. And more often than not, we'll go into the conference room and I'll tie my computer into the big screen. That way, as I'm sketching, the director, he can be giving me notes in real time. And quite often it's more than just the director. The DP, the director of photography, is there with us. And if it's a big effects or stunt sequence, the stunt coordinator might be in there. The effects coordinator or producer might be there. Another producer might come and go. But this way, they don't have to look over my shoulder. So as I'm doing my really quick thumbnails, and I do this across the board, even if I'm working remotely, I'll just share my screen with them like you guys are seeing now. But if I'm on location, I'll use a big screen TV. And it works great. That way we can all be spread out around the big conference table and see everything that we need. And every director works differently. Some like to talk through shots. Others have a written shot list. And some do their own rough thumbnails. So in Antal's case, he liked doing his own thumbnails. He had a very particular way of showing what is one shot with the multiple panels. And so we would go through that. And then the pencil marks, I would actually go through and just handwrite little notes on there. And then, like in the plane, I would draw just a quick overhead plan so we figure out where everyone is. Once I can see where the different characters are, like we've got, the 2 characters down here in the back, we see the entry door on the left and the pilot up in front. Then I can make sure that screen direction is being held properly and all that kind of stuff. All right, I get an idea from all this, and then I start going through everything with the director, shot by shot. As a story artist, that's my job, is to illustrate the director's vision. And this is one of the things where it's really different than 2D animation, where the story artist does all the breakdowns. If we're not illustrating in live action, if we're not illustrating the director's vision, we fail. And most live action directors know exactly what they want. So we have to get into their head. And however that works, there's a lot of different ways of doing it. Antal made it easier just because I could get a lot from his rough thumbnails. But we always enhance those anyway. So once I sat down with him, I would start sketching out, so I sketch in the background, and we have the character would enter. And then, whatever the action was, the characters are tied up in the back, and then we've got our overs back and forth and a close up. And we always ended up doing probably 2 or 3 times as many shots as what his own thumbnails were. And one of the nice things about working with Storyboard Pro, and I do these fast. and you're seeing literally the first pass on rough sketches here. Because it's on a timeline, if there's a camera move, I would actually do the camera move on my thumbnails. If a character is moving across a screen, I'll actually do, sketch it on that character on a separate layer and do the move. So even in the thumbnail stage, as we're going, we see the flow, and the director can see, are the shots working the way they see them in their head. So that's one of the reasons that we end up with extra shots. It's like, oh yeah, I guess we need this, and I'll come up and I'll be suggesting things as we go. But again, my goal is always to be within the director's vision. I never take over, but I'm always trying to plus and enhance whenever possible. And even these rough thumbnails, production can work. So, going as fast as possible. Once I get through an entire sequence with the director, the next thing I do is I quickly go through and I add in all of the notes, all the dialogue and all the action notes. And of course, you do that over here in the panel tab. Because once I get that in, I will quickly export a PDF and a movie of my thumbnails to the director. I want the production to be able to start working immediately. And all of this happens within the first half day. My meeting will generally be 2 to 3 hours long with the director. And within an hour after that, they've got the entire sequence roughed out. So it's fast. And generally, it's 100% approved. I very seldom have to make changes because I get approvals so quickly as I'm working with them. So I'm 2 or 3 days ahead of the way a lot of other people work already. There's no back and forth and misinterpreting what screen direction or what side of the screen the director wants someone. That's approved as I'm roughing it out. And then a lot of times we've got vehicles, whether it's that plane or other vehicles. So once I know what all we need, then I'll go through and I'll start building a library in the 3D models of whatever kind of vehicle we're going to need. I don't like having to draw vehicles. I can. It just takes time. So I will find generally within SketchUp, I can find most things for free that I need. And then with, off of my thumbnails, I can grab exactly the angle that I need and render it out to 2D, which makes it really quick and easy. Why would I draw that if I can do it that quickly and get it in at the right angle? So that makes it, again, everything I do so much faster. And then I'll take reference photos, like in this one sequence when Hopper is being dragged through the prison to his cell when we first find him. How does his body react? Well, I've got a lot of these little figurines. I mean, I keep them right next to me. I use them all the time. So I line them up and I use that to draw from. So I'm able to get really close to what the final look is going to be. Then I go through, because I like delivering animatics, and it's so fast with the software that even within the tight timelines of production, I'm able to give them a full animatic. So I will actually do a scratch track myself of all the dialogue. That way we can see, are we sitting on a shot too long? Or does it feel like we're missing something in here? I'll throw in a couple sound effects. I don't lay down a full Foley, but if there's a big crash, I'll add crash sounds. If there's gunshots, I'll add gunshot sounds. Things like that really help emphasize the main actions, and you can really get a feel for how that plays out. And not only is that good for when the director is reviewing things, but everyone in a crew, and in particularly for producers who aren't part of necessarily all of these meetings, looking at a still image is one thing, but seeing something moving with audio is completely different. And everyone understands what you see in video. We're all trained since basically the day we're born to understand what we see in visuals. So not only does that help get approvals and move things forward and everyone understand exactly what the director's vision is, but editorial uses my animatics. In fact, I just had a call earlier today on a movie that I had worked on for a big part of last year. Editorial puts the animatics in until they get the final effects. So it's used a lot more than just in prep. And then we get into doing the cleanups and the finals. So in this sequence here, you know, as we're coming, there's snowfall, and as we come up over the trees, we come up on the prison. I didn't know what the prison looked like. They hadn't designed that yet, so I just drew something with a big open courtyard because I knew there was an open courtyard in it. And then got into doing everything. And as you notice, there's always movement. If the camera was moving, I moved it. If the characters were moving, I had them move. So it's so easy to see. And then when we get into the interior prison, I was able to make use of the 3D model. Again, why redraw it if it exists? So, you know, it was great to be able to have this because it's so accurate to what we'd be seeing. Now, one of the things I wanted to show you guys, because this was really cool. So the director wanted this sky shot that comes up over the wall and looks down into the pit. And then you'd see, you know, down here, if you can see it on your screens, you can see the guards dragging Hopper across the blood-soaked ground. So while this looks really complicated, this was a very simple effect to do in Storyboard Pro. So the snow is one layer. So it's just one layer of white dots that I animated just slowly moving down. I've got the foreground wall here, and I've got the background. And within the background, I've got Hopper and the guards. And I had those on the same layer so that as I was moving things, they were attached to the ground. So using SketchUp, I created the background, you know, created the angle of the background. And all I did was move that background up and make it bigger so it looks like we're coming up towards it. But the way to make it look like we're coming over the wall is to have the wall as a separate layer, and I move that at a different speed and at a different angle. So it looks like we're coming over it. So when you put them together, it's this magical reveal that looks like a 3D image, but it's just basically two layers that I was just smart on how I put them together to get exactly what the director wanted. Add the snow layer on top, and it gives you that much more depth. So I was able to use that a few different times. There's another shot here. Same kind of thing. He wanted to push past one of the guards and the barbed wire to show Hopper being dragged across the ground. And then if you remember that one other shot looking, you know, looking through the prison bars, well, that was for this angle here where, you know, after Hopper gets thrown in the jail, he walks over to the bars and you get this great depth looking through those bars, and even more so once we come up into a close shot of him. So being able to walk the set with the director is hugely helpful to really work this out. And then it's in my head. And once I see it, you know, I can draw it once I see it. So once everything is done, I send them a PDF. In live action, we always do vertical layout. It's always in portrait mode. 3 panels, one stacked above another. You see the dialogue and the action notes are off on the right-hand side. For those of you in animation, numbering is also totally different. The way you number scenes is completely different than in animation. A scene in live action encompasses all the shots within one location at one point in time. So all the different shots in the jail cell are one scene. Whereas in animation, as most of you know, anytime there's a cut, it becomes a new scene. So you have to know the differences. And luckily with Storyboard Pro, you can set it up under Edit Preferences. If you're working in live action or animation, here, terminology style. So you can just go back and forth and it'll number properly for you. So thank you guys for setting that up so wonderfully. So I'll send them that, and then I'll also export an animatic. Now, what I'd like to show you guys, because I know we have a couple minutes here, one of the things that I did is this sequence in where he's drugged across the ground and thrown in the jail cell. I edited my original animatic to the final cut that aired, and you can see how close it is. I get a kick out of doing these. I think this is really cool. So I'm going to shut up for a moment. And this is about 2.5 minutes long. I'm just going to play this out, and then we can go over some other stuff.
It could be worse than etiquette. At least you have company. Your eyes don't deceive you. I'm a prisoner now, like you. You're a smuggler. You betrayed me. Betrayed us. You said we could trust them. You swore to me. It doesn't believe we could. You think this is what I planned? I just lost everything, everything! We both knew the risks, both of us. Joyce. Oh no, Joyce.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
Such a great scene.
Yeah, it is. It's so fun to see how that that comes together, and again, it's it's because of the way that I'm doing this, working with the director to get the director's vision. That's it's nothing magical on my end. It's just listening, and and asking 1,000 questions. I mean, I constantly ask questions as we're going because I want to get the director's vision, because then the storyboards are going to be used. Otherwise, it's just an exercise of futility. But if it's the director's vision, then it helps with scheduling. It helps with budgeting. All the different crews know exactly what they're doing. The breakdowns are there. They can mark off each storyboard panel. In fact, generally what happens in live action is when I'm on location, I'll look over and I'll see my storyboards mounted on a big board there right next to where they're shooting. And they literally just take a big marker and mark them out as they go through to make sure they get every shot, because it's really expensive to go back to a location afterwards. In fact, a lot of times you can't. You don't have access to it again. So it helps in every way. And especially when you're doing something where, half of a shot is done on location, another half of it is done maybe on a blue screen set somewhere, to make sure that you get all the elements that you need. So, I mean, these are very helpful in a lot of ways. And it's cool to see your work there on set as people are shooting.
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned earlier bringing action figures into meetings with directors.
Yeah.
When did you start bringing that into your practice? I'm just really curious.
I've always done it since the first day I started storyboarding. Whether it's with vehicles, if I know there's a vehicle around, I remember on one of my early movies, it was a movie we were doing in Jacksonville, Florida, and it was called the Miami School Bus Hijacking. So the director and I got a school bus and a bunch of different Hot Wheel cars, and we got a big piece of paper, and we knew where the locations were, so we drew a big map of the roads to match where we were going to be shooting. And the director and I would get on our hands and knees, and so the paper was on a table, so we're at eye level with it, and we literally would play like little kids. And the cars, we would move them around like on the chase, or when cars would slide to a stop to block the bus. Of course, here we are, adults going, making all the noises and just having a great time. But there's no better way. And then I would actually mark down, okay, we're going to have a camera angle here, and we're going to put another wide angle here where the car will flip and land on the camera, and all those types of things. And from that, then I could draw it exactly. So we would literally work it out together. Sometimes we act out on locations ourselves, but you don't always have that ability. But when you've got your action figures, these come into account to help. All right, so we, close up here. Do you want a close up profile? And that just so quickly answers a lot of questions. So yeah, the toys are just another way to help get into a director's head. It's a little harder sometimes when you're on working virtually, but even then, if a director says, I want to be close on the front of a vehicle, I'll hold it up to the camera. Do you want close on a vehicle like that, or close on a vehicle like that where you get to see down the side a little bit? Now, I could describe that, but this becomes really quick. No, let me see the other side. Oh, yeah, let's do it on that side, but have it off of camera a little bit. Yeah. All right, so boom, knowing that, just with a couple questions and a toy, I'll start sketching it out. And even on my thumbnails, I'll sketch in layers so that I'll know, I'll get approval from him or her, depending on who's directing, right away. So, looking here, like on this panel, I had the arms, the arms are on 2 layers because I wanted that to be a blur for the punch. I grouped all that together with the 2 characters. I got the background separate. But, when I was thumbnailing, I thumbnailed Yuri on 1 layer. Let's see, where do I have? Oh, and I did a photo of myself as Hopper to put in there. So, again, I use every trick in the book because I need to get through this fast. And it makes it really fun. Look, I've been doing this a long time. I've been storyboarding. Well, I've been in the industry for about 37 years. I've been storyboarding for about 35 of those, and full-time storyboarding for 32 years. So if there's a way to speed me up, I have generally found it. And the thing that's probably sped me up the most is this software. I'd fight you if you said I had to storyboard without Storyboard Pro. I just won't do it. I can deliver so much to my clients so much faster, and it makes my job so much easier. And because it's faster, I can actually have a life outside of production. This probably software saves me 2-3 hours a day, easy. And I'd rather spend those 2 or 3 hours a day hanging with my family or watching a movie than just working.
We really appreciate you taking this hour to talk with our community about your work. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through some of the audience questions. And if you do have questions for Mark, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will ask them over the next half hour. So Lenny and Erica were both asking, how detailed are your notes from your talks with directors? And do you sketch while the director explains, or are you trying to absorb just as much detail as you can?
What I do is I sketch with the director. So, for instance, as the director's talking, I'm drawing this right here. And in case there are times that every director is a little different. So if this only takes a minute or so to sketch up, but if the director is going really fast and I know that I need to keep up with him, what I'll do is, maybe I'll write the character's name. Those aren't the actual characters' names, but I'll write their name really quickly so I won't forget later who is in which position. So I'll do notes like that. If there's a camera move, I'll just do the camera move, so I'll just really quickly add it in. So boom, there we see it. And the director says, no further. Can you go over? Let's go into a close up of the two people are being held captive instead. Okay, so I'll just make that quick change, and we're off and running. So I'll add in notes that are not represented from my thumbnails, but I do not move on until I get approval on my rough thumbnail from the director. And even my thumbnails, the characters on separate layers. So let's say, can you move them closer in? I'm not having to redraw anything. I just grab that layer, slide it over, put it in, or make it bigger, smaller, whatever. Layers are your friend. And I'm always drawing because I'm always anticipating needing to make a change, even after it's final, because sometimes we lose a location or the script changes. Sometimes the director has another idea. It's never because I don't get it right the first pass. I always get it right in the first pass because I'm doing this with the director. So I very seldom have changes for change's sake. It's always because there's an external reason. Sometimes it's budget. Like I was doing a tiger for Snowfall, and the director had all these shots that he wanted to do, but the producer said, no, you can't have more than 10 shots of the tiger. ILM's doing it, and we can only afford 10 shots. So, there are times you have to go through and make changes like that. So what that means is I always draw the full background. I don't draw around the characters because if I move a character, I don't want there to be a gap in the background. So it doesn't take any long. In fact, it's faster to draw a background complete and then draw the characters on top, because doing a partial takes more time to go around things, and it makes it faster for me to make changes. So now if there's a change, and it generally takes me seconds rather than hours. So so it's quick this way.
Nick wants to know, do live action storyboards generally require artists to be on site, or is it possible to work remotely?
Most of my work is remote, in particular since COVID. We're one of the positions that it's much easier to work remotely. We don't have to be on site. I like being on site, at least for part of it. If it's possible for me to walk a set and or a location with a director, that's always beneficial. The drawing aspect of it doesn't matter if I'm with them or not. Sharing my screen is just like them looking at the big monitor, unless we get up and actually act it out together, which I've done numerous times on productions. But cleanup, I almost always do remotely. So it's easy not to be there, but then you miss out on the camaraderie and getting to know personally the producers and the UPMs and stuff like that. And you might think, well, why do I care? Well, you care when they go to hire people in the next production. And the more you work with someone, the easier you are to remember. So that personal connection is also what helps having recurring clients. It's one of the reasons I stay so busy. I make sure that they remember who I am.
I think it's also a good question too, because I saw you recently posted an article that you wrote about the cost of working from home.
Yeah, and that is something to keep in mind. As a story artist, we often don't ask for kit fees. But if your position is normally one that's in on location, or if you're staffed somewhere and you decide you want to work from home, or they say you should work from home, production should pay you for that space. They need to reimburse you for use of your equipment, because if you go into an office, any company will give you an office, they'll give you a desk, they'll give you a chair, they'll put they'll have the computer that you need, with your drawing tablets. They'll pay for the software. They've got IT that's going to set everything up. And if there's a problem, IT takes care of it. The cost of electricity they pay for. All these and more are things that if you are working remotely, now you're paying for it. Well, why should you invest, which is what you're doing? Why should you invest for production? Now, I just raise my rate rather than doing a separate kit fee. So when if I'm working from home, I charge more. My rate's just higher. If now there is a nice little trick where if you're asking for more money and production says, well, we don't have that much budgeted, you can accept the lower fee and just say, but I want this as a kit fee. So you can end up getting the same amount of money because it's two different budget lines. So they might only have a certain amount budgeted for the actual work, but you can get more by also asking for a kit fee because they always have a line for kit fees for various positions. So it's just another way you can get more money without raising your rate. So nice little tip for you guys.
That's a really good tip.
Yeah.
Sam has an existential question for us.
Okay.
He's asking, do you ever see a time where previs completely takes over, or do you think storyboarding will always have a place in live action production?
Storyboarding will always have a place. Not everything will always be storyboarded, but in particular, because Storyboard Pro now allows, like when I was showing you guys the the 3D vehicles, there's a lot of overlap, and my storyboards are so accurate. And because I'll even do some 3D sequences. I did a movie last year that had this huge car and motorcycle chase with these really exotic camera moves that fly all over the place. So I just built the whole thing in 3D in Storyboard Pro. They don't need to go to third floor or whoever for doing the big previs. I've already done it. Now, in live action, a lot of times when they're talking about previs, that's where they're setting up everything to be dimensionally correct, and they figure out, okay, this camera base or this the crane base will fit in this room, and we're going to actually put a 38 millimeter lens over here in this corner. So what they're doing is they're taking what's already been storyboarded, and now they break it down into all the info for equipment to make sure that everything will fit to get the shots that the director wants. Only really big budget projects that have a lot of time generally features, not as much on TV, with the exception of some of the really big like Game of Thrones and things like that. They've got time for doing previs. TV doesn't have time for that. So the closer you can get to that in your storyboards, the more beneficial your boards are to production. And because we can do so much in the storyboard software, my work has actually never been replaced. It can be enhanced, but with what I give them, that's what everyone works from.
Yeah, and I think also one of the things that you mentioned too is that in live action, you are constrained by physical space. So placement of cameras is really important because depending on your location, you might not be able to put a camera where you'd want to.
Well, look, and as a story artist, it's one thing to be a quick illustrator, but you need to be a lot of things. You should understand editing. You definitely have to understand directing because you're working with a director to visualize the director's view. And sometimes, the director will say, I want you to do the breakdowns, which is great. And it's a mix, but more often than not, the director knows exactly what they want. But you need to be able to speak their language. You need to understand how stunts work. So, oh, we're going to need to hide pads here. And if the stunt coordinator is there and they're giving you notes, if a DP or a director or director or stunt coordinator say, oh, we need to have this for the shot, that I write that down as a note, and then that goes into my action notes on the tab panel over here. So I'll type out that kind of information because if they said it in my meeting, the rest of the crew needs to know it. So I'm as specific as possible across the board. If a director says we're going to shoot this 48 frames with a 24 millimeter lens, that's going in the notes. I make sure I track that. So I listen to everything that they're saying to get that in there. And it benefits the entire production. But that's also where it's helpful to, you were mentioning, you know, how big a camera is. If you know how big the cameras are, if you've actually walked the space, you can actually help the director and the DP figure out things with the more knowledge that you have. So the more you know about production overall, the more helpful you can be. You know, in my case, I started as an art director. I've done a lot of directing, both in live action and animation. You know, I've been a visual effects coordinator and supervisor on projects. Yeah, I've edited a lot of my own things. I've written a lot of screenplays. You know, so the more you know, the more helpful you can be, because what we do as a story artist touches most different positions on a live action crew.
Lenny is asking, how do drawing styles differ between animation and live action boards? And Ingvild has a similar question. Would you say storyboarding for live action needs to be more detailed than for animation?
Great questions. The biggest answer is live action. They don't want to see cartoony art. So that's where animation story artists have the hardest time, is their art and their faces look cartoony. They don't want to see that, period. So you have to have more of a comic book style, more of a live action. When I say live action, it needs to look real, not like a cartoon. And most of us grow up drawing and reading comic books. So if you can just emulate that style, and it doesn't matter if your style looks different than mine, even if there's multiple story artists, it doesn't matter. Whereas in 2D animation, you have to match the style of the show, because you have to draw on model. There is no on model in live action, which is nice. It just can't be cartoony. And, you know, in some of these, you know, there are times when you're having to go really fast. The finish isn't going to be much different than this thumbnail. You know, luckily my thumbnails are good enough for production to use, but it's just because I've been doing it that long. You know, I prefer doing, you know, really nice looking storyboards. And the more I can get it to look like the characters, you know, the easier it is to just quickly read, but it doesn't have to be that clean. So, you know, I could be working on like an episode of The Walking Dead, and some of the boards are really tight, but some of them, you know, if I have to do 100 or 140 in a day, they're not going to look like this, because there are times you have to just pump through a ton of them. They're going to be really loose, and that's okay as long as the information is there. And so if there's motion arrows, I'm going to label the arrow, like, you know, here I've got tracking, and that's important because that even just a still, you know, we're tracking back with him. If I put Hopper in the arrow, that means the camera is still and Hopper's coming at us. So arrows can be misinterpreted. So I always label them. If there's any chance of not knowing what it is, just write in it. There's nothing magical about an arrow. It's just what you don't want is someone to misread it, because if someone misinterprets the storyboard, it's the storyboard that fails. So I try to be as clear with everything as possible on that. But style wise, the other thing to keep in mind is you don't need as many drawings in live action. Whereas in animation, every keyframe you need to storyboard, but in live action, you don't. It's just the major actions. That's why if someone's walking across, I don't need to show them with each step. I'll just do it, you know, a nice drawing of them and just slide it across. You don't tell the actors how to act, but you want to emulate, you know, good poses and good expressions so that it means something, but you don't have to show everything. So you do as few drawings as possible in live action to get across the action. So that's a big difference than in animation.
Sylvester wants to know, if someone wants to work for a show like Stranger Things,
Mhm.
what should you have in your portfolio?
A lot of good live action samples with action and creatures. No one is going to look at animation samples and translate that to you being able to work in live action. You have to
Hmm.
show a style of art that works for live action. But good action sequences. There's, you know, humor is one thing and drama is one thing. Action is something else. And it's not even the quality of the art. I mean, you don't want to show crappy art, because good art catches people's attention, even if that's not what the finals are always going to look like. So, I generally only show samples of the better art, because, like I said, that just grabs people's attention. But you need a variety of things, and your credits. To be honest, your credits are one of the first things they're going to look at. If you don't have any live action experience, chances of you getting a gig storyboarding on Stranger Things is almost nil. They're going to want to work with someone who's got a lot of experience. And you build that experience with smaller projects, and you build up.
Ingvild wants to know, what do you do when producers don't give you all of the reference photos that you need? Where do you go to get those images, including on location, or do you do you ask the production to give you the images you need?
I go to anyone I can, and who is best kind of depends on the production. Sometimes the first or second AD can help you a lot, because they generally know who has what, and they'll get it to me. I know the second ADs on The Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead have always been hugely helpful for me. Sometimes location departments have their own Dropbox or whatever software they use for having things posted online. So I'll find out where that is. The director of photography often will help me a lot, because DPs are usually in meetings in live action, which is great. I love when they're there, because they're the ones who are helping keep a similar visual style throughout the series, because there's generally two. One is prepping while one is shooting. So they have time to sit with us, and they like being a part of it. I love working with DPs. So because of that, when they're scouting locations, they're generally taking their own photos. So half of the time I get my reference photos from the DP, which is great. But I just keep asking. And if they don't have it, I ask someone, whoever it is again, it's going to vary. I'll ask someone to find me or get me photos. If they haven't locked it down yet, then the director and I will find some sort of reference, or I'll draw an overhead plot plan and if we're working remotely, they'll say, we're going to do a bedroom, and I'll just put up something blank. And on Skype, I'll show them, here's where you can annotate, and they'll sketch up, so on their end, they might sketch, I got to sneeze. They might sketch up, the bedroom's going to look like that, and we're going to put the camera over here. And so, maybe the bed will be here, this character comes here, and this one comes up into the foreground. So maybe this is Stan and this is Fernanda. So we'll just mark out stuff like that in an overhead. Great. Once that's all, once we get that done, I'll throw that off on the side, and I'll just use that as a reference, and then I'll start sketching out, whatever I need to as I'm drawing. So there are times that they don't have all the information for you, and you just do the best you can. Maybe they'll have a photo. Well, we kind of like this. All right, great. Let's just use that for now. I'll revise it if I have to later.
Sarah wants to know, do you have any favorite scenes from your career as a storyboard artist?
It's fun. I get to ask that a lot, and when I'm working, yeah, I mean, there are times like on some of the Walking Dead shows when you just get to blow the crap out of some walkers, and you see this great blood and gore and stuff. Those are fun. I love drawing horror stuff. On some of the superhero shows that I work on, great superhero poses are fun. Anything that's really dynamic, a lot of foreshortening, same kind of thing. If you're drawing comic book, what do you like the best? Things that are just fun to draw. And then there are times if something becomes iconic, is really fun. On Stranger Things, whenever you've got, the Demogorgon leaning forward and the head flares out, the flower petals come out. Those are exciting and really fun to look at. The Demodogs, when they're leaping on someone and biting their head off. Those types of things are great. Or if it's based on a comic book like The Walking Dead, where you've got the shot where, a third of the cast are beheaded and all their heads are on spikes and the camera pans over to reveals them. Those are iconic. And so redrawing things that have become iconic, even from a comic book, those are really fun. But some are just goofy shots. If you remember way back on The Waterboy, it's another show that movie I worked on, years and years ago. If you remember when Henry Winkler drops his pants and moons Adam Sandler's character, and there's a tattoo of Roy Orbison on his butt. Not only did I storyboard that, I actually designed the tattoo. So that's my artwork on Henry Winkler's butt. That's a favorite just because it's a moment everyone remembers. It's funny as hell. I get a kick out of that. That type of thing is really fun. It's a nice little claim to fame. So there's lots of them.
I'm gonna ask one more question from the audience before we wrap.
Okay.
Ingvild wants to know, do you prefer to work with directors who have no preferences and give you more of a free leash, or do you prefer to work with directors who know exactly what they want from each shot?
It's always better if they know what they want. Because if they don't know and kind of don't care, they will when they get on set, and then my storyboards don't mean anything. I much prefer working with a director who knows what they want. The meetings are better. The storyboards mean something at that point. It's beneficial for production. I like working with creatives, and I don't understand why some story artists say, well, no, just leave me alone. I want to do the breakdowns. Why? If they're not going to be used, it's just a waste of time. I want to be able to help production. I love visualizing things from the director. And when you're working with really great directors, you learn a lot from them, because every director has their own style of visual storytelling. And I like figuring out and working with them. And it's a great challenge to dig into a director's head and pull that out. And then when you see the finished product and what you worked with them is there, that's thrilling and exciting. So there's no comparison. The more a director knows what they want, I'm there. And I love getting in there and working it out with them.
All right. So, Mark, we're running out of time. Where can our viewers go to follow you and find some of the resources that you've made for storyboarding?
Well, my website is storyboards-east.com. If anyone wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn, that's where I do all my postings. I don't use the other social media platforms because I actually get a lot of work from LinkedIn. And as far as resources, few people buy books anymore. I mean, I wrote the main book on storyboarding called Storyboards, Motion, and Art. But LinkedIn really is where more people find stuff. So I've got a lot of courses on LinkedIn Learning, and 4 or 5 of them specifically just on storyboarding and Storyboard Pro. I think I've got 3 courses just on Storyboard Pro, the essentials of it, advanced Storyboard Pro, and working in 3D within Storyboard Pro. So, and there might even be another one. But yeah, if you just search for my name or storyboarding within LinkedIn Learning, you'll find them. And if you're in school, most schools give all their students free access to LinkedIn Learning, so it won't even cost you anything. So this is the best way to learn everything, because I've got, I don't know how many hundreds of short videos on everything you need to know about the software.
All right. Mark, thank you so much for walking us through the scenes that you storyboard for Stranger Things and going into detail on the craft of storyboarding for live action productions. I really appreciate the amount of depth that we've gone in. And I also want to thank the audience for introducing some really good questions to this discussion. This was the final interview for the Toon Boom Animation Trends event, a 3-day online event for animation and filmmaking professionals. And if you missed any of the free panels, production discussions, or tutorials, be sure to follow us on YouTube at Toon Boom Animation, as we will be resharing the sessions by early next week. So thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.